Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon session of presentation of art and design, paper code 442, paper 2. Yesterday, we talked about paper 1, and we happened to mention a brief description of paper 2. Today, we shall be looking at the paper 2 in details, what it entails and what is required of the students and the learners, what you need to understand and what you need to do in order to perform or to perfect your performance in paper 2. Now, as we mentioned earlier yesterday, that the paper is purely a practical paper. And the duration of the paper, it takes 1 hour for the sketches, to do the sketching, and 3 hours to do the complete work. In terms of marks, the paper is marked out of 100%. And the paper has mainly 2 alternatives or 2 sections. The section A of that exam paper, the practical paper, consists of a drawing and an option of painting. So you can pick either a drawing or a painting. The section B or the alternative B of that of the practical paper consists of purely graphic design work. Now, it is good that the students note that as far as art and design is concerned, this is the backbone of an art exam. It is the paper that actually proves that you are able to handle not just the examination, but art as a subject through practicing, through practical work. Therefore, it is of essence that the students must put so much emphasis and effort when handling this particular paper. The other reason the students should pay much attention to this examination, or rather this particular paper, is because it is marked out of 100%. And then it gauges the student ability to be able to practice what they've done in class in terms of drawings, painting, and graphic design. So I would wish to advise, or rather encourage, my colleague teachers handling the subject that as much as we do the theory, try to cover the syllabus in good time. It is important that we pay so much attention to the practical bit of the art and design paper. Let the student do more practice in line with the syllabus per topic, and after every session, let the students be able to critique their work. Let them be able also to be able to mark their own exams and comment on their colleagues' work. Now, what does the paper require of the learners? We've mentioned the alternatives. We have alternative A and we have alternative B. The alternative A consists of questions 1 and 2. So what are some of these, what are the requirements of some of these questions, question 1 and 2? In most cases, the question 1 is normally a drawing and the question 2 is normally a painting. The questions looks to test the ability of the learners to be able to create, because most of the times the question is about asks about creating. For instance, or rather for example, a question paper reads, section A, Answer only one question chosen from either alternative A or alternative B. Alternative A, we have drawing and painting. Then the instructions. It is also important that the student read the instructions and take the instructions carefully and seriously. You are instructed that the use of rulers and other mechanical devices is forbidden in this alternative. That is alternative A, the drawing and the painting question. So the drawing, for instance, you're given a question like this, K.C.S.E 2016. In pencil, charcoal, biro, or pen and ink, depict a pictorial composition based on the theme, assisting victims of disaster. The composition should be within an area of 45 centimeters by 35 centimeters. Now, let the students be able to synthesize what the question requires. That is drawing. The second question 2 in this particular paper says, create a pictorial composition based on the following description. So you're given a descriptive type of composition, what sometimes would want to refer to as a still life composition. So the wordings in the questions restricts the candidates from straying. Like, for example, the words used in these particular questions are create a pictorial composition without the use of mechanical instruments such as rulers, protractors, and any other mathematical set instruments. Now, what the question 1 and 2 in alternative A, that is drawing and painting, require. When we are looking at the students' work, the following must be clear in their particular work. 1, when tackling questions on painting and drawing, we look at the interpretation. For example, has the learner been able to interpret the question when creating a pictorial composition? The question asks, or rather directs the learner to create a pictorial composition depicting assisting victims of disaster. Does the candidate or the learner understand what the terms in the question stand for? For example, the learner must be able to relate with the term assisting, then victims, and then know what a disaster is. So the first point that we look into is the relevant interpretation of the question. Is the learner able to interpret? Is the learner able to create that particular composition in mind before even attempting to do the sketch? Remember, the paper has 4 hours. The 4 hours, 1 hour is for sketching, and the 3 hours is for doing the work. So a candidate has at least a whole full hour to interpret the question. So the relevant interpretation is given priority, and normally it is awarded marks up to around 20 marks in the national exam. The other bit of interpretation the candidate should pay attention to is the bit of originality. My point number 1 under interpretation: originality, creativity, and imagination. How original is a candidate's work? How creative and how imaginative is one's work? We require the candidates, or rather we require the learners, to be able to come up with an original idea, not that one that is borrowed from somewhere or a work that has previously been done or been seen somewhere. We expect the candidate to be able to be original in its ideas when creating a composition. Most of the learners have their own different ways and have their own originality and creativity. The bit of creativity also helps the learners be able to create some outstanding art compositions and forms. We also expect you to be imaginative. All this cumulatively gives us close to 10 marks. Then, under interpretation, again, we look at the correct dimensions. We expect the learners to be able to, one, take note of the dimensions given. In most cases, the exam, when tackling questions or when tackling paper 2, that is the practical paper, most of the works are given specific dimensions to work with. You are given the working area, the size A2 paper, but then you cannot do a composition in the entire page. You are required to limit yourself to a specific workspace. So whatever composition you may choose to undertake in this particular alternative, that is a drawing or a painting, you will be given dimensions. Make sure your work is within those dimensions given. Most preferably, the dimensions are normally between 35 centimeters and 45 centimeters. So the candidate is supposed to limit their work to that particular space. The marks for dimensions is up to 10 marks in the national exam. Then we talk about the creation of feelings and mood. Here, this particular point is limited by the learner's ability to interpret the kind of composition given. For instance, I've given an example. You are asked, or the question directs you to give, or rather create a pictorial composition on a theme such as assisting victims of disaster. Can we be able to see the mood in that particular composition? Can we be able to see the feelings? We are talking about victims of a disaster. Let the candidate, or that rather the learners, be able to create that kind of feelings and moods in their composition. In most cases, we encourage the learners to stick, or rather limit their composition to the particulars of the composition. We are talking about assisting victims of disaster. We don't expect the candidate, or rather the learners, to start introducing other elements that has nothing to do with the composition. Let the learners limit. Let us see the action of that particular composition, and the learners to limit themselves to that particular composition instead of paying attention to other elements that do not add value to the action. So the center of the action is more important than any other elements the learners would wish to add to the composition. So that helps the candidate in creating the feelings and the mood in a particular artwork. Again, for example, you might be given a composition to create a composition. Let's say on the emerging issues, we are talking about the locusts. So we expect the candidate at this time, what are some of the dramas that have come with the locusts? You've watched the news, you've seen what has happened, you've seen the disasters they've caused, you've seen the panic. So when creating a composition, we need to see the feelings. You need to capture the feelings and the mood of those particular, of the drama that comes with such a composition. Other than interpretation, we also expect the learners to be able to create a very pleasing, or rather very pleasing and entertaining composition. That gives us our second point, or rather our second area to look at, to pay attention, the composition. We expect the learners, or rather the students, to be able to use the appropriate format. When you're talking about a format, we have two types of format for creating a pictorial composition or creating an artwork. We have the portrait format and we have the landscape format. So there are those compositions that require that will require a format, a landscape format. When you're talking about compositions that require details, wide details, or rather you want to infuse techniques of drawing and painting, like creating perspective, aerial perspective. We don't, in most cases, the portrait format is not appropriate for such a work. So when creating that composition, you must be sure what kind of format your work will take. So the format will give you up to around 5 marks, the correct format, appropriate format in a composition. Then the second bit in a composition is appropriate use of space. Remember, we acknowledge space as one of the elements of art and design. Then we have the positive space and the negative space. For instance, let us shortly jump to slide number 5, that particular artwork. Now, the question of these, the composition was based on a question, create a pictorial composition of a small child seated on a mat, busy repairing his toy. So if you look at that particular composition, the use of space, we have what we call the negative space and the positive space. So the area where the artwork occupies, that particular area becomes what we refer to as the positive space. The area where we do not have any sort of art forms or any elements occupying becomes what we call the negative space. So that becomes the negative space. Now, how you use your space matters a lot. We should not have too much negative space occupying your work. We should have most and advisably 3/4 of your working space occupied by a positive, being positive space. Meaning you must be able to balance your work very well in a given space. So you are advised that you use 3/4 of the space of your work. That is on the composition. Then The other point that we should pay attention to is application of elements and principles. The reason as to why you are taught principles and elements is because they act as the basic or the basis on which most art forms are created. It is the elements and the principles that we refer to as the ingredients as far as creation of particular artwork is concerned, be it drawing, be it painting, be it graphic design. In one way or the other, the principles and the elements must be present and must be recognized in your art forms or your composition. So the candidate must pay so much attention to the principles such as balance, we have dominance, we have rhythm and movement, we have harmony and unity. Harmony in the way you shade your work, creation of value, how you create value, how you create texture, how you use color in your work. And if the candidate is able to use all those in their work, the correct application of principles and elements in paper 2 gives a candidate up to 10 marks. The appropriate use of space gives us up to around 5 marks. So whatever you do, as you do your composition, ensure that you are able to use 3/4 of the space. Ensure you use the correct elements and principles in your work, and format. Pay so much attention to the format, the appropriate format, either portrait or a landscape format. So all this is supposed to give you close to 20 marks for the composition. The next area that the candidate should pay attention to when handling or tackling the paper 2 of art is value, the use of value, tone, color in their particular work. We expect the candidate, remember we've mentioned in the composition, the correct application of principles and elements. Now, the value, tone, and color forms part of the elements of art and design in a composition. Now, how do we expect these to be evident? How do we describe, or how do we tell when a candidate is able to use value, or rather create value, tone, color, and in their painting or drawing? First, the candidate must be able to understand and effectively use the media or the tools. When we are talking about the media and the tools, in most cases, in drawing, we talk about the use of pencils, charcoal pencils, pens, colored pens, talk about sticks, and any other hard media that can be used to create that particular work in drawing. When you're talking about painting, the use of media, we look at how the candidate is able to use a paintbrush How well can a candidate use a painting brush to create the work? Is the candidate able to use color as a material in painting appropriately? If you're using other tools such as the palette knife, is the use appropriate for that particular composition? And how well or how competitive do you use the media that you're using for creating that particular artwork? So we encourage the learners to interact more with the medias that we use for creating these particular art forms or art composition. If it is drawing, we expect you to interact more with the use of pencils. You understand the types of pencils that we have. We have the shading pencils. We have the sketching pencils, such as the H pencils. Then we have the shading pencils are the B pencils, for example, 2B, 3B, 4B, 5B, 6B, all the way to 8B. Those are the shading pencils. How well do you use these shading pencils to create value and tone? And how well do you use color as a material to create value and tone in your painting? The second area that you should pay attention to, we are talking about painting and drawing techniques. How well do you use those painting and drawing techniques to create value? Sorry for that brief interruption. As I was saying, how well do you use your shading and painting technique? What are some of the painting techniques that you've been taught in class? We talk about the brush stroke technique. We have brush stroke technique in painting. We have the wash technique in painting. So we expect the learners to be able to become competent enough to use some of these painting techniques. We have other drawing techniques. And the drawing techniques, we expect the candidate to be able to shade their work properly. We have the shading techniques. How well can a candidate shade their work? How competent enough can you be able to use the pencil, the shading pencils, to create the tinting and the shading? Remember, when handling painting, you can easily create the value and the tone through contrast. That means you must be able to understand the use of the color schemes. You must be competent enough, and you must have a wide knowledge of what we call the color wheel. You must have interacted with the color wheel, or rather created one, in order to be able to understand the color schemes as far as painting is concerned. So we move forward, moving forward is the choice of color or value. How well, if you're handling a painting, how appropriate is your choice of color? Are you using dull colors to create a composition? In most cases, when you use dull colors for both the elements, or rather the forms in your composition, and again you use a dull color for the background, what happens is that the forms in your composition will not clearly come out. For instance, if you look at this particular painting by a student, the choice of color is appropriate. The student has used appropriate colors. If you look at the forms, the human forms and the man-made forms, this particular composition was based on the rescue, assisting victims of a disaster. If you look at the composition, you can be able to see the action of the rescue taking place. But then the use of color, the choice of color for the background and the forms, we can say it is appropriate because we are able to see the forms. Then we have the neatness and impact. When using the media appropriately, when you talk about effective use of media and tools, this is what gives us the neatness and impact. The neatness. If you are able to handle the brush and the color appropriately, we expect your work to be neat. We do not expect color to be spilling all over your work. We expect some very neat work. Remember, you are working within a dimension given. And I mentioned most of the time, or most of the cases, the dimension given to us is 35 centimeters by 45 centimeters. So you limit your work there. Within that working space, we expect your entire work to be neat. We don't expect spillages, and we don't expect some very dirty work. The impact. Can you be able to use the color to create an impact? That is, can you be able to use that color to evoke a mood, emotion, or to show action? If you're doing pencil work, how well can you use the pencil work? How well can you use the pencil work to create? Like, for example, if you look at that particular drawing, if you look at the child's facial expression, how well can you use color to create, or rather to indicate or to show the emotions? If you look at that particular drawing, you look at the student's facial expression, you can see that the kid is totally absorbed in what that kid is doing. If you look at the hands, look at the eyes. The eyes are concentrated on the toy. So when we are talking about the use, the impact, how well can you use your media of choice of creating a pictorial composition to create an impact? We expect you to be able to create mood, like we mentioned in part A. We talk about creating feelings and moods. This forms part of the impact. Can somebody else looking at your work be able to feel the impact? We are talking about victims of a disaster in a composition. Can a third party who has not interacted with your work look at your work and be able to tell that indeed the action that is taking place, the facial expression in the characters in that composition goes hand in hand with what the question requires. So you are advised, or it is of essence if you are able so it is good, it is advisable if you are able to create an impact using the media, whichever media you decide to use to create your work. So that bit of the impact should be able to be seen in your particular work. Now, judging from what, or rather from what we've presented above, I will take a few minutes quickly, and I would wish that you look at the works we have here. In a few minutes, I want us to discuss this work. Now, the question is about creating a pictorial composition of a child seated on a mat and fully absorbed in repairing his toy. So I will give you a few minutes to look at the work. Try to analyze the work in terms of interpretation. Has this particular candidate or learner interpreted the question the way it should be? Is there originality, creativity, and imagination? The relevant interpretation of the question, the correct dimensions, though the dimensions are not given here, but let me assume that the learner did put into consideration the dimensions given. Then you look under interpretation, try to see whether the learner put emphasis on the creation of feelings and moods. Is there evidence that the learner was able to capture the feelings and the mood of that particular composition? And then the composition, look at the general composition. Is the format used appropriate for this particular drawing? Has the learner used the space appropriately? We're talking about appropriate use of space. Then application of the principles and elements. I want you to be able to highlight some of the elements used in that particular work. Then look at the part C, is the value, tone, and color. We might not necessarily talk about color for this particular work, but look at the value and tone. Has the learner been able to use the media effectively? The use of media, in this case, we are talking about pencil. And then, has the learner used the appropriate technique, drawing techniques, that is in creation of tints and shades? Then the choice of value, is there evidence of value? Then you look at the general work, is it neat? If you look or study the work, is there neatness? Has the learner portrayed some neatness in doing the work? Then lastly, look at the impact. Has the learner been able to use the media to create an impact? If you look at the work, does it go hand in hand with the question that says, create a pictorial composition of a child deeply absorbed in making or repairing his toy and is seated on a mat? So at this juncture, I would wish to engage the learners present that we look at the work together. And at the end of the day, I would wish, at the end of it all, I would wish if you were to critique and mark the work, how many marks would you award to this particular candidate.
Changuli, you can unmute your microphone. Changuli, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone.
Yes, you can. Let us look at the work.
Okay, Changuli, kindly reduce the volume of your PA system or your subwoofer.
Yes, thank you. Now, can we look at the work? And maybe you can say something about the interpretation. We've talked about, remember, we've talked about interpretation, the originality of the work, creativity, and imagination. Now, the question here was reading, create a pictorial composition of a child deeply absorbed in repairing his toy and is seated on a mat. Looking at that particular work, has the candidate been able to achieve what the question requires?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a correct interpretation.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, if you are to mark that work, out of 40 for interpretation, how much would you score that candidate?
30.
30 out of 40.
Yeah. 30. Yeah.
That is good. Let's say you've scored the candidate 30 out of 40. Well done. Then look at the, is there a creation of feelings and mood? Look at the face.
Yes.
Is there the mood created?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then look at the action. Look at the hands. Is that particular child doing some repair?
Yeah. Yeah.
So with that in mind, we can say that the candidate is within the question.
The question.
Yes, interpretation of the question is clear. Now we have that one we've scored 30 out of 40. Let us look at this particular one. Interpretation. We are talking about a child, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
If you're looking at that face, is that face of a child or ni mtu mzima?
Mzee.
Ni mzee, si ndio?
Mzee.
Huyu ni mzee sana, hata venye anakaa mzee venye anacheza na toy. Isn't it? That. Then we have another. We look at that. Huyu mkimwangalia.
He's not deeply absorbed to what he's doing.
Yes. So that candidate, in terms of capturing interpretation of the question, he's not getting the correct interpretation. Yes. So how much would you score this particular candidate?
15.
15. Any other? Any other? 50?
I think half.
Half.
Yeah.
Half of 40.
Yeah.
So
20.
And
yeah.
how much would you score this guy, given that face is not a child?
15 probably.
15. So
Yeah,
if you compare this work and this work, this one is better because at least we can say this one is a child of to say up to 15 years, isn't it?
Yes.
Like huyu ni mzee. Sawa. Now, going back to the first one, that is interpretation. Out of 40, we've given 30. The composition, look at the composition. In terms of the format, is the format appropriate?
Yes.
What is appropriate, isn't it? So out of 5 for the format, how much would you give? For the format out of 5?
2.5.
2.5, 3.5?
3.
3.
Yes.
Now that is 33 out of 45. And then appropriate use of space. Has the candidate used the space appropriately?
No.
No.
Yeah.
So out of 5 again, how much marks would you give?
2.
2.
Yes.
2.5. So we have 35.5 out of 50, yeah? 50. Then application of principles and elements out of 10. How much would you score this candidate? 8.
Yes.
So that is 41.5 out of 60, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Now we look at the other bit, the value and tone of the color and work. The effective use of media. Has the candidate used the media, that is the pencil, effectively?
Yes.
So out of 10, how much would you give that candidate? 8. No, the way the media has been used, personally, I would give a 9 because there is appropriate use of the media. The way the candidate has used the pencil, at least the pencil has been used appropriately. Yeah?
Yes, perfect.
A 9. That is how many? 50 out of 50.5 out of 70.
Yes.
Yes. Then we look at the tinting and shading. Now, looking at the work, has the candidate explored other shading techniques, or the candidate has just used one particular shading technique? One particular shading. The candidate is supposed to variate the shading techniques. We have the cross hatching, we have the hatching, and we have smudging, we have linear shading technique and all that, isn't it? So this particular candidate has picked specifically one shading technique, though he has used it well, isn't it?
Yes.
Out of 10, how much would you give him?
7.
7.
Yes.
7. So let's say that is 57.5 out of 70. Out of 80, yeah?
Yes.
57.5 out of 80. And we talk about the choice of value. Is there a creation of value? The tinting and shading.
Yes.
It's clear. It is there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Out of 10, how much would you score? Out of 10.
9.
9.
7. Yes.
7. Any other mark? So we
You
go,
are the judge. Can you tell us?
No, let's
we
give
go
him
for
nine.
the 8 hapo katikati, yeah?
Yeah.
So that is tumefika 60, 65.5, eh? Out of 90. Then the neatness and the impact. Out of 10,
Yeah.
how much would you give them? 8.
8.
So 65 plus 8, that is 73.5.
74.
74, eh?
74.
Yes, so that is 74%, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, what happens? Let's pick your school as an exam center. Now, if this was the best work and it has scored 75,
Yes.
this work, the second one, this one is marked against 75. You understand?
Yes.
If this was the best and it is 75, now these ones are marked against the 75.
So it is marked against the top, the
Yes,
first
it is
one.
marked against the top.
Okay.
So make sure as you do your work, you do a very good work. Yenye hata wakiweka the top hapo juu, if your work is presented against that, it can compete. It can compete. Because now this guy and this guy cannot compete. This guy cannot compete. If you marked this against 75, this guy is going to score very low marks. You get how that mathematics works?
Yes.
Yes. So that is what happens. It happens the same with the painting. What you need to note, again, is most candidates do not like doing painting. Although the painting scores, there is a trend of students not attempting the painting questions. So I'd advise you, those who are good in brushwork or those who are good in painting, you do more practice. But then make sure as you do the practice, you also time yourselves such that the time does not cut you short when handling the painting. Though you are normally given a grace time to allow the work to dry. So that is what happens with the painting and the drawing. Now, we shall go straight to the alternative B, that is question 3 and 4. And most of these questions basically are normally graphic design work. Now, what does graphic design questions require? When you're talking about graphic design, we talk about your ability to create specific forms of art that are mainly used for communication purposes. Most of the forms or art forms in graphic design are used for communication, advertising. We're talking about awareness, creating awareness, and so on and so forth. So what does the question require you in graphic design? We talk about interpretation. Again, just like painting and drawing, you have to be creative. The creativity should be across the board. The originality, how original is your work? And then the imagination, you must be imaginative. You must be able to imagine things. You must be able to synthesize words and then transform them into a visual image. Then, under interpretation, the subject matter. If you are asked to create a particular graphic design work, for instance, you've been asked to create a CD cover or a CD sleeve or a book design or book cover, are you able to create a form or a composition that looks like a book cover? Or does your book cover resemble a page layout? Or does your page layout resemble a letterhead and all that? Then we have this. We have the correct dimensions. Again, when working with graphic design work, and graphic design work is particular with the dimensions. You are given specific dimensions to create particular artworks in graphic design. And there are those graphic design work that have specific dimensions. For example, if you're asked to design an envelope, we don't expect an envelope to be the same size as a poster. And we do not expect the size of a poster to be the same as that of a business card. There has to be that difference. Then we talk about the typographic work, the lettering. How well do you use the letters? We have types of letters or types of fonts. We have calligraphic letters, we have bold letters, we have serif and sans serif. How well do you use the letters in graphic design work? Then, away from that, we also look at the composition. How have you used the composition such as elements and principles? Elements in this particular work is mostly color. Most of our graphic design work, we do it in color. How well have you used color in the graphic design work? Then the principles. We have the principles of balance and layout. Then we have the types of layouts in graphic design. We talk about the symmetrical layout, asymmetrical layout, and the radial layout. Is the layout you've used appropriate? Then again, just like painting and drawing, we have the use of space. Again, we have the negative space and we have the positive space. How well have you used the space there? You must be able to use 3/4 of the space given, paying attention the dimensions given. Then we have the format. The format we have, we pay attention to the layout, the types of layout that I've mentioned, the symmetrical, asymmetrical, and the radial. We also talk about the format in terms of the portrait. We also talk about the format in terms of the landscape format. Like, for example, I don't expect you to create an envelope using a portrait format because of the dimensions of the length and the width. Then we have the illustrations. Most of the graphic design work require illustrations. And illustrations is also taught as a topic when handling theory in graphic design. We have photographic illustrations where we use photographs as illustrations that accompany the words. Then we have what we call the line illustrations. This is where the image used in the illustration is purely created using line. Then we have the spot color illustration. The spot color is basically using flat color. When you use a flat color as illustration in graphic design work to create a graphic design work, the flat color or the block color is what we refer to as spot color illustration. Then we have the wash illustration. The wash illustration is simply use of color, but then introducing the tints and the shades. When you use a lighter color, we take, for example, hue, red, or color, a red color. Then you tint it, you make it lighter. When you make it lighter, we refer to that as a wash illustration. Then we have the typographic illustrations. There are those cases that we use letters or abbreviations of particular names to create illustrations. We can use, for example, we take an example of the brand Kenya Airways. We use the letters KQ. When the letters are used alone as illustrations, they become typographic illustrations. That is use of letters as visual images. Then again, when dealing with graphic design, we look at the color. How well do you use color in graphic design work? Remember, in most of the graphic design works, we encourage you to be using color, flat colors in that case, or block colors. They are supposed to be pure without tints and shades. Although with time, we have accepted and given students the room for creativity, and that is why wash became part of the illustrations, because when you're dealing with wash, we are dealing with color, but in very light form. So the appropriate use of color scheme and distributions. Given that you've been taught about the color schemes, the primary and the secondary colors, and you understand how to use these particular colors to create contrast, we do not expect the learners and the candidates to be using colors that tend to absorb each other. They are supposed to create contrast. In other words, you are supposed to use a primary color against a secondary color to create a contrast. And then the use of color to create harmony and unity. By looking at your graphic design work, the use of color, does the color tend to create harmony and unity? Those are some of the fundamental questions that you're supposed to be asking yourself when handling color. The same goes to when you're handling a painting in alternative A or section A of the paper 2. The way you use color matters a lot, and it is what gives you scores as far as this paper is concerned. Now, the last bit of graphic design, the areas you should pay attention to, just like the other alternative, effective use of tools and media. When you're dealing with graphic design, we deal with color, and we say that we should use color when it is in flat or block form. So how well do you use the media? The media in this case is the watercolors that you'll be using to create an art composition. Again, as a warning and an advice, when creating graphic design work, avoid using mark pens in your work. They are not considered as colors. They are considered as pens. So if you can, use fountain pens that you can actually use different colored inks instead of using mark pens for your work. Because should you use mark pens, they smudge. And if you look at your work on the flip side, the ink in the mark pen smudges. So it makes the work dirty. And what happens? In that case, you are penalized for the use of media. You did not use the correct media and tool in creating your work. So you lose the marks in the effective use of media. Then, using mark pens and any other type of pen that smudges the ink on your work, the bit of cleanliness and neatness will not appear. So you must be able to handle the color appropriately and use the brush in appropriate way to maintain the standards of cleanliness and neatness in your work. That comes under workmanship. Again, lastly, as we talk about the workmanship, the overall composition. Have you been able to, one, interpret the question correctly? If you are asked to create a poster, have you created a poster? If you are asked to create a letterhead, have you created a letterhead, or your letterhead tends to look like a page layout? So those are some of the areas that you need to pay attention to. The way you use the media and the tools and the way you interpret the question is what we refer to as the total impact in a composition. Have you been able to capture the composition as it is supposed to be? Or have you diverted into creating something else that you are not as? Again, I would present to you some samples of graphic design work. And just like we've done with the painting and the drawing, I would like that you study them and find out if the candidate managed to do the interpretation, to have the correct interpretation of the question, if the composition has effectively used the correct elements and principles, if the space has been used appropriately, if the format is appropriate for that particular work, and the illustration, if the illustration is clear. Before I present to you the samples of the graphic design work, I would wish to take you back to the composition, the interpretation. Point number 4, typographic work, that is lettering. You should take note that when creating graphic design work, the use of letters, your letters must be legible, meaning we have to, we can clearly see that, that a letter L is a letter L and not I. They must be readability, meaning the spacing between the letters must be appropriate. You are not, or rather you are not expected to tie the letters together. So ensure that whatever illustration, both typographic and pictorial illustrations, are clear and the spacing is well taken care of. Now, for instance, illustration number 1, the question required the learner to talk about, or rather to create a poster for a shop advertising the new arrival of some of their products that they sell. Now, that is what the first candidate did. That is the poster that they created. They are supposed to create a poster. Now, when handling such graphical work, you must understand the features of a poster. We've talked about the typographic illustrations. If you're able to see, the candidate created a poster titled Twizzle Footwear. If you look at that, we have the title of the poster at the top left. Then there is the creation of a logo. The candidate created a logo for that particular company or that particular shop. Then we have the illustration. If you look at it, if you look at the image at the center, new arrivals, then there's an appropriate illustration to accompany the type of products being sold. Then there's the personal details of the details of the shop or the company. We have Twizzle Footwear, the box office, the telephone, and any other relevant information required for that particular work. Then, if you look at the second, again, looking at that work, we have the title of the poster, Twizzle Footwear. Then we have the pictorial illustration. And if you look at that illustration, it is actually appropriate. You can see the shoes, the types of shoes that is that the company is offering. Then we have the details of the company also present, and then the use of the color. If you look at the color, the use of the color, the candidate has actually, or the learner has actually used flat colors, and the candidate has further explored the use of elements such as space, the use of space, the format. The format is appropriate. We are talking about a portrait format that fits the entire composition. Illustration number 3 talks about creating a badge. If you look at that particular illustration, we can say that the candidate has achieved by putting up, or rather capturing the elements and the aspects of a badge. If you look at that, we have the name of the institution, Dedan Kimathi University of Science and Technology. Then we have the motto. Then we have the illustrations. With those elements and with those aspects, we can actually certify that what we have there is actually a badge. Again, pay attention to the use of color, the color scheme. The colors that the candidate, or rather the learner, has used in this particular illustration are flat colors, and they create a very beautiful contrast. In other words, the color of the background and the color of the work itself is creating that particular contrast. You are able to see the letterings, the images clearly. So the image is not absorbed by the colors. The last illustration, we talk about the creation of a trademark. If you look at how the candidate has used color, the color is flat and creates a very good contrast. So this is particularly how you are supposed to use color when handling graphic design work. So again, when looking, what are some of the expected graphic design questions? What are some of the areas that you are likely to be tested in graphic design? Now, the following are areas that you should really pay attention to. We talk about the CD and the album covers and sleeves. In the last 2 years, we've had, in 2017, the candidates were asked to create a book cover. In 2018, they were asked to create a CD sleeve. In 2019, they talked about a poster. So with those trends, we expect the candidates to pay attention to the following forms of art in graphic design. You need to pay attention to and be able to create a CD sleeve or a CD cover, or what we call, sometimes referred to as the album covers. Then the book cover, a book jacket, and a page layout. The page layout can be in form of a book or even a newspaper layout. So with the recent trends, we expect you to be able to note how a page layout looks like in a newspaper, a magazine, or even a brochure. Then we have the visual symbols and identification symbols. The candidate is, or rather the learners are therefore required to pay so much attention to visual symbols. Be up to speed or update yourself with the recent visual symbols and identification symbols. Visual symbols, we can talk about the road signs and etc. Identification symbols, we can talk about logos, badges, emblems, trademarks, and so on and so forth. Then we have the cards. We have business cards, and the rest. Then we have posters. The learners should be able to design different forms of posters. What are some of the types of posters we have? One, we have commercial posters, those that are sometimes referred to as the advertisement posters. Then we have the social posters. We can have political posters. We can have religious posters. And lastly, we can have educational posters. Then we have, let the candidate be able to create brochures. Remember, in the K.C.S.E 2018, the candidates were asked to create a logo of a particular institution and then create a brochure, then include the logo of that company in the brochure, advertising some of the services that they offer. Again, as you do your revisions and your practical work, the candidates too pay attention to corporate identities. When you talk about corporate identities, we talk about letterheads, envelopes, business cards, advertising, and wrapping papers. Then we have packaging design. Those are corporate identities. Most of these corporate identities, we meet them in our day-to-day lives. So I encourage the candidates to be paying attention to some of these things. You meet them in day-to-day life and take them for granted, but they form part and parcel of your learning process. Then lastly, we have let the candidates pay attention to animated cartoons. In most of the times, we do meet such some of these in our day-to-day life, watching TVs, looking at newspapers and magazines. What are some of these animated cartoons? We have cartoons, we have caricatures, we have comics, we have 2D animation and animated flip book. So let the learners be able to, one, interact with the newspapers and magazines that have these characters, the cartoons and caricatures and comics and all that. Let the learners also understand the cartoon characters. We have human and animal cartoon characters. They can be in 2 dimensions or in 3 dimensions. Most of the time, when it is in 3 dimensions, it is normally in form of moving pictures, that is videos. So with all that, those are some areas and how to go about them when handling the paper 2 exam, both in drawing, painting, and graphic design. At this juncture, I would welcome questions from the learners present. So I welcome questions and reactions.
My question is,
Yes. Mhm.
you've just talked about the marking scheme of drawing. When
Mhm.
someone has done drawing part,
Mhm.
we analyze the drawing, the marking scheme of drawing.
Yes.
But in turn, you take part of. In turn, you can do shading in art and you shade in painting. Is the marking
Yes.
scheme do relate in the same part? So
Yes.
they do relate.
When we are talking about how to go about creation of value, when basically you shade to create value, isn't it? Hello.
Yeah.
We shade
Yes,
to create value, or rather to create the contrast, isn't it? Now, when we are looking at the
Yes.
creation of value, we look at the creation of value in both drawing and in painting. So how do you create the value in painting? Is by the use of brush. Understand? And color. You create value using color by either adding a lighter media or adding a dark media. You understand? So
Yeah.
when you're looking at value,
Yes.
look at value across the board in both painting and in drawing.
Okay.
We look at them. We look at them the same way.
Okay. So the marking seems to be similar.
Yes, in both painting
Okay.
and drawing.
Okay.
Yes.
And another question.
Yes.
When you're doing the work of typography,
Yes. In
when you're
graphics.
doing typography, yeah, in graphics, are you allowed to mix the faces? If you choose to go with uppercase,
Mhm.
or are you allowed to go with uppercase and lowercase at the same time?
Yes. Very good question. Now, what happens?
Yeah.
Remember, when we are talking about the interpretation, we also talk about the originality and creativity, isn't it? And then
Yeah.
in class, you are taught about the characteristics of letter forms, where we have distorted, expanded. You understand? Distorted.
Yeah.
Expanded. Now, when you mix the characters, it forms part of the characteristics of letter forms, and it forms part of creativity. You understand?
Okay.
Yes, because for instance, when you are designing a book cover for, let's say, small kids, if you use all capital letters, those kids will never look at that book, isn't it? So there's a way you have to distort those letters and the images and the numbers to make it more appealing to the kids. So that forms part of the creativity and originality in creating a graphic design work.
Okay.
Yes. Any other question or reaction?
The last one.
Yes.
What about you talk about the wash method when you are doing painting?
Yes. Now, the wash method, what you do, you apply the wash for a pictorial illustration. When designing an illustration, you can use the wash for the illustration.
Yeah.
Like just look at the examples I gave. Now, let us look at let us pick that one. You see the illustration, the shoes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, you can actually do the wash on the illustration, or you do the wash on the background. You look at the background. You choose one. It's either you do it on the illustration or you do the background. You do a wash on the background. So you choose one area. You can use it on the illustration or you use it on the background.
Okay.
You understand?
Yeah.
Yes. Any other?
Yeah.
Okay.
Another one has just popped in.
Yes.
Yeah. They're
Yes.
asking the differences between mosaic and collage.
The difference between mosaic and collage.
Yeah,
Now,
collage.
when you're talking about the difference, we look at the characteristics of both mosaic and collage. So, like for example, if you look at the characteristics of a mosaic, what is the most distinctive characteristic of a mosaic? One, we talk about the emphasis being paid on different colored materials. You understand? So the first characteristic of a collage is the use of the materials, different colored materials. Then we say it is a monomedia, meaning we only use one type of a material. That is why we call it monomedia. 3, it is 2-dimension artwork. Why do we say it is 2-dimension? It is flat on a surface. We don't have protruding heights on the materials. Then we talk about the method, or rather the technique of creating it is through superimposition, which means sticking. You understand? Yes. Next to the to one another. Then we have the most distinctive feature of the mosaic. That is the crackled effect. The crackled or crazed effect. You understand?
Yeah.
Now, there is this point that you normally mention, the shimmering effect. Have you been taught that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Take note that the crackled or the crazed effect do not create shimmering effect. You get it? The shimmering means shining. So the shimmering, initially, traditionally, mosaic was made using glasses. So it is the glasses creating the shimmering effect, not the minute spaces. You understand? So those are the characteristics of mosaic. Then we look at the characteristics of a collage. We've said mosaic, we pay emphasis to different colored materials. Collage, we pay emphasis to the texture, different textured material. So when mentioning the difference between a collage and a mosaic, if you're talking about material, you say in mosaic, the emphasis is paid on the different colored materials, while in collage, the emphasis is paid on a different textured material. So the other one pays attention to color. This other one, the attention is on texture of the material. Then we've said mosaic is 2D. Collage is supposed to be 3-dimensional. Because we can actually use materials that have heights, or rather materials that protrude from the support or the surface of the working surface. Then we've talked about mosaic as being a monomedia. Collage, we can use different forms of media or different materials. So we talk about a monomedia and a multimedia. Then the technique talked about superimposition as a technique in creating mosaic. In collage, we talk about juxtaposition, meaning we can stick the material on top of each other or besides each other. Yes, any other question?
Okay, another question.
Yes.
State 4 ways of creating an illusion on a 2D surface.
An illusion of a?
State 4 ways of creating an illusion on a 2D surface.
Yes, an illusion of on a 2D surface. That question is simply asking you, how do you create value or contrast on a 2-dimension surface? The illusion, when you're talking about illusion, we are trying to create a 3-dimension illusion. We can create an illusion of distance, illusion of depth, illusion of space, and all that. You understand? Now, when we are using pencil work or drawing, we talk about the shading, the tinting and shading as ways of creating that illusion. When you're dealing with painting, we talk about creating simultaneous contrast to create illusion on a 2D surface. So when you create value and tone, create that illusion. The illusion can be variety. You create illusion of depth, illusion of space, illusion of distance, and all that. Yes. Okay, thank you very much, and all the best in your exams.